Good afternoon, guys. Let's start. Okay, we need the time. I'm going to read from my lecture mostly. Please stop me should you have any questions or comments, okay? And then you have my email somewhere on the handouts. Should you need anything after the lecture, more explanations or you want to discuss, please just contact me and I'm ready to discuss it with you. Perhaps no other philosopher, is it okay or is it too high? Perhaps no other philosopher in modern times have had such a huge and effective influence on the social and political realities of the last 150 years as Marx did. The eminent French magazine, Le Nouvel Observateur, has called Karl Marx, between quotation marks, the philosopher of the third millennium in its October-November issue of 2003. Whether one tends to call his philosophy a social theory, a materialistic approach to history, a theory of political economy, or even a science, as some people do, Marx's philosophy was most liable to different kinds of readings, misapprehensions or misinterpretations, devaluation, and sometimes to critical and positive assessments. In the sphere of politics, this is understandable, because Marx's writings have too often been reduced to ill-digested slogans, and their piecemeal publication over some 100 years, till 1956, some manuscripts of Marx were still being discovered and published, okay? So we talk about the late Marx and the earlier Marx, okay? And his late writings shed great light on his earlier writings as well. What during the last decade of the 19th century came to be known as Marxism is essentially the blend of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels' thought. Both were German thinkers born during the first quarter of the 19th century. This 19th century was marked by the victorious French Revolution of 1789. It had signaled the end of the Ancien Regime and made certain the advent of the bourgeoisie. We'll try to discern these terms together while giving the lecture. What do we mean by bourgeoisie? Let us pause for a moment to dwell upon the major changes during the 18th century that culminated in the advent of this what I call the victorious French, not I called, what I'm saying now in the lecture is the victorious French Revolution, and to follow its aftermath on the social levels. First, major economic change was propelled by Western Europe's tremendous population growth during the late 18th century, extending well into the 19th century itself. These pressures occurred in societies already adjusted to market transactions, possessed of an active merchant class with considerable capital and access to overseas markets as a result of existing dominance in world trade. Europe's social structure changed toward a basic division, both rural and urban, and between owners and non-owners. Those who have capital and are investing in the new markets and are investing in trades, and those non-owners, basically millions of poor workers in the industrial European cities. In this context, an outright industrial revolution took shape, led by Britain, which retained leadership in industrialization well past the middle of the 19th century. France, Germany, and Belgium gained ground rapidly. As we noticed in the Enlightenment, we didn't do the Enlightenment. In the Enlightenment, we talk about pockets, مظبوط, where Enlightenment started as a mental, intellectual movement, which is a social movement as well. So we talk about pockets in Europe. Industrial Revolution, we talk about pockets as well in Europe, okay? One of the main centers is England. And then other countries followed in this Industrial Revolution. Technological change soon spilled over from manufacturing into other areas. Increased production heightened demands on the transportation system to move raw materials and finished products. Important, well, number 4 is urbanization as a vital result of growing commercialization and new industrial technology. Factory centers such as Manchester grew from villages into cities of hundreds of thousands in few short decades, where the industry was focused. By the 19th century, there were millions of industrial workers in Europe, many of them living in the most miserable conditions. Attracted by the promise of paid work in these centers, immigrants from rural areas flooded into the city only to find that they were forced to live in crowded, polluted slums awash with refuse, disease, and rodents. These workers formed what came to be termed as the capital working class, a term that appeared first in England around 1815. Contemporary writings describe the pathological problems of urban living, disruption of artisans' models, social breakdown, problems in services, working children and women, beggary, prostitution, alcoholism, suicide, insanity, illiteracy, disease, mortality, and overcrowding. The misery in the living conditions of the working class in industrial cities led to the spread of social ideas and the founding of various socialist movements. This correlation between always economics and the movements in the society, social movements, and the production of new ideas. We can't talk about the production of new ideas as if they happen in a vacuum, okay? So we need this industrialization, the working class, and therefrom, with this relation between the society, the social relations, and economics in the society, we start to have new ideas. We can start talking about the social writings, okay? So, socialist movement. When Marx and Engels published the manifest of the communist this is the Communist Manifesto. I prepared a new PowerPoint with the Arabic version. This is the Arabic version. By the way, it's translated in all possible languages. We have at least 4 Arabic that I know of, prints, okay, of this manifesto. So this is one of the manifests. This is the copy that we're reading. Different copies might be on Moodle, or you can use anyone, I think. The main thing, it's a short, by the way, pamphlet, okay? So please read it, you'll enjoy it. So when Marx and Engels published this manifest of the Communist Party in 1848, they were relying on the rich experience and on the writings of socialist movements of various colorings all over European cities, industrial European cities. The abundant utopian literature of the 18th century Enlightenment could be considered as the first models of socialist thought. Nevertheless, realistically, modern socialism had its roots in the reflections of various writers who opposed the social and economic relations and dislocations brought by the Industrial Revolution. They criticized the injustice, the inequalities, and the suffering brought about by the new modes of production and the free and uncontrolled market on which it rested. Adam Smith and the theory of Adam Smith, مظبوط, laissez-passer, laissez-faire, and the free liberal market. So they criticized this injustice and the inequalities. To the greedy individualism of their age, they opposed a vision of a new community of producers bound to each other through fraternal solidarity. They are talking about producers. Now, Marx is going to shift the whole thing towards companionship, solidarity of the workers. Nevertheless, socialist groups of utopian nature were not the only ones to occupy the scene. Excuse me. In the big industrial cities of Britain, Belgium, and France, there spread secret revolutionary revolutionary societies, which are to be seen as representative of the actual political movement of the working class. So we had many branches. Before Marx and Engels had written this pamphlet, we had many branches of the socialist movement. Some of them are active military, others are more utopian. So as we're going to see, this pamphlet tries to bring all these ideas together. The events of the French Revolution, some of these secret societies call themselves communist, from Kommune. The term being derived from Kommune, denoting to urban towns that had won their initial rights of self-government from the feudal lords, and especially the Paris Commune during the French Revolution, which is a revolutionary movement. The events of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic venture in Europe helped ripening the conditions in different European lands to carry on revolutionary change, active change. The general economic condition of Europe deteriorated in the 1840s. So the year 1848 witnessed the spread of revolutionary acts all over Europe. On February 20, the revolution started in Paris. The revolution started in France and was followed by outbreaks of violence and revolutionary activity elsewhere in Europe. It was on the eve of these revolutions that Marx and Engels had published the Communist Manifesto. So it is a manifesto. A manifesto is a short, small booklet. It is a pamphlet. So it was meant as one of the guiding writings for this revolution. So it was written on the eve of 1848. I'm going to skip point 5 in its 3 sections and we'll hand out, and we reach now point 6, the Communist Manifesto. It is a pamphlet worked out by both Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels during December 1847 and January 1848 to serve as the platform of the League of Communists. It was published on the eve of the 1484 revolution that spread in Europe, as I said. The League of Communists, or it was called as well the League of the Just, was a secret organization of émigré German artisans and intellectuals living in France and Belgium. Now, we have to keep in mind that this pamphlet is of a polemical. You know what's the meaning of polemical? Think about it, okay? It is of polemical nature and of a rhetoric nature as well, written under the immediate pressure of synthesizing, bringing together among different, even opposing factions in the League. We've seen that in the Socialist League, we have some utopian, some intellectualists, other were active revolutionary, and other revolutionaries who did not have the consciousness of the revolution, okay? So it is a synthesizing between all these different groups. To that, it represents the ideas of the young Marx and Engels. So what we're reading is not Marx's philosophy, for that matter, or the Marx and Engels philosophy, okay? We are only reading a small pamphlet in order to introduce us to Marxist thought in general, which is still very alive and lively today. Perhaps when you think of Marxism, young generation, and perhaps as my generation, we think of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, China, Maoism, Leninism, all these things. This is one possible facet, one possible interpretation of Marxism, okay? Perhaps not the best interpretation. We can speak of the modern philosophers, neo-Marxists as well, okay? And different trends in Marxism. So we are not reading something which is dead. This is one of the main pamphlets that help us understand industrialization, capitalism, and it is philosophical. It is philosophy of economics. Okay, so please keep this in mind. To that, it presents the ideas of Marx and Engels as the threads of a sketch that was to be elaborated exhaustively and in length in later works, especially in Marx's Grundrisse und das Kapital. The manifesto is divided into 4 sections. Preceded by an introduction that begins with the provocative words, a specter, a ghost is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. In the first section, Marx and Engels outline the theory of history and foretells an end to exploitation, industrialization, working class, all these children and women working under horrible conditions. This is exploitation. The exploitation, as we are going to see, how you get out the surplus value and make the best use of it by misusing the human being. Identifying class struggle, underline please, as the primary dynamic in history. He characterizes the modern world as the stage for a dramatic confrontation between the ruling bourgeoisie, i.e. the capitalists, and the downtrodden proletariat, the working class. This is in globe pictures, okay? Now, bourgeoisie itself does not mean capitalist directly, and working class does not mean directly proletariat. This is a vocabulary. Much has been written, much work has been written, ink has spelled over this vocabulary, okay? So it's not to take it directly like this and use it. Now we are still at the beginning, how this vocabulary was used in the beginning in this Communist Manifesto. Driven by the logic of capitalism to seek ever greater profit, the bourgeoisie constantly revolutionizes the means of economic production, also by way of modern technologies. In doing so, it unwittingly sets in motion socio-historical forces that it can no longer control. We have dialectic relations between all these things. We're going to talk about it and try to explain more. This lecture is not enough, like in all other themes, so this is why we read in class and we discuss in class. As the proletariat increases in number and political awareness, consciousness, this is very important to have a proletariat, okay? It is the consciousness of the class. Heightened class antagonism will, according to the manifesto that we're reading, generate a revolution and the inevitable defeat of the bourgeoisie. This is triumphant language, and this is language with much hope. Beginnings, it's always the beginnings, okay? In the second edition, Marx and Engels identify the communists as the allies and theoretical vanguard, طليعة, we call them in Arabic, of the proletariat. He emphasizes the necessity of abolishing private property, which will lead to a fundamental change in material existence that will unmask bourgeois culture. The ideological expression, bourgeois culture is the ideological expression of capitalism. And that capitalism is a whole machine in work, مظبوط, is a robust machine in work. This is only the ideological outcast of the. After the revolution, economic production will be in the hands of the state. That is the proletariat. That is not directly. All the state is the proletariat. This is not direct relationship. So please be aware of the language that they are using. It is still a very troubled language. As I said, language of beginnings. Organized now as the ruling class. Because ownership will be in common class distinctions, because ownership will be in common, distinct class distinctions will start to disappear. The third section criticizes various alternative socialist visions of the time, of that time, which is now largely of historical interest, but displays the author's formidable polemical skills. ما تنسوا انه he is trying, as I said, to synthesize between different groups. So the first part is the vision, okay, of revolution. The second part, he is polemicizing with other groups that were active at that time. In the final section, which compares communist tactics to those of other opposition parties in Europe, ends with the roaring call for unity. The manifesto ends with the workers of all countries unite. This is still the roaring cry of communist parties and workers. Now, the manifesto is the most concise and intelligible statement of Marx and Engels' materialist view of history. Hence, although it produced little immediate effect, it has since then become the most widely read of his works and the single most influential document in socialist literature. Marx has written thousands and thousands of pages in economics, okay? So we can't just think about reading this, and we say Marx is a philosopher. So he's not a philosopher because he's written this with Marx and Engels, okay? Please keep this in mind, and we're not reading Marx as such in his philosophy. In what follows, I'll try to dwell upon some main concepts and theoretical issues which are meant to facilitate our reading of the manifesto and our appreciation of Marx's thought. For a historical background to the writing down of the manifesto, you might want to read the introduction, by the way, of this edition, which is an excellent introduction. This is prepared by David McLellan. Okay, this introduction is very fine. First, what about class? All the time we were talking about class struggle. It says history of all hitherto found society is the history of class struggle. What about class? What is this class that we are talking about? The opening words of the Communist Manifesto, the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggles. But unfortunately, Marx nowhere offers a systematic analysis of the concept of class. It might seem that Marx usually uses a two-class model consisting of bourgeoisie and proletariat. But this model is not static and is liable and was liable in Marx's different writings, by the way, to contain different divisions and subdivisions. The key to this approach was the idea that the essential element in an understanding of the human being and her or his history was a comprehension of human productive activity. Not anymore talking about human nature as such, okay? We are the products of our society, of the economic system, and of the economic and social relations, each and every generation according to the country where they live. in, okay? So the human being are product of an activity, productive activity, which takes place in society, يعني in the struggle within the society. So the fundamental activity of the human being was the way she obtained her means of subsistence by interaction with nature. In short, it is the human being's labor. معناتها labor, we look at the human being through his labor. Self-creation through labor was the primary factor in history. And the ideas and concepts, political, philosophical, or religious for that matter, through which human beings interpreted this activity were secondary. Okay? And this is why Marx, in one of his writings, mentioned that religion is a secondary alienation. I'm coming to alienation towards the end of this lecture. Is everything fine? For history was not the result of accident, nor was it shaped by the acts of great men and women, these heroes, and still less by supernatural powers. History was and is the creation, mostly unconscious creation of laboring human beings, and it is subject to observable laws. Okay? This is the beginning of the study of sociology, by the way. Observable laws in nature and in society. According to Marx and Engels, social conditions determine character, both directly through their effect on the individual powers and needs, and indirectly through the creation of interests, which the human being then strives to satisfy, and the conditions under which capitalists and workers live differ significantly. These conditions fix the state of one's powers and needs. The visible result is a psychological and ideological superstructure, which is practically the same for all men and women caught together in a given set of material يعني social economic relations. Okay, this is just to understand the relation between the base, what we call the base, and what we call the superstructure of ideas and other things, okay, other cultural productions. These conditions, this is what permit Marx to generalize about people of different classes and to treat most of the individuals who come into his work as instances of a kind. Okay? So those same conditions which determine a group's character establish their boundaries as a class. It's not easy to talk about class, by the way we do نحن in our society, and many people do, to talk about class and different classes, and we have to be very careful with this. Based on the social division of labor, the most important of these are the relation to the prevailing mode of production. The mode of production that brings together all these social, industrial, economic relations in a certain society. The mode of production differs from society to society. The mode of production differs as well according to different times. Okay. Now we might have a mode of production that prevails over more than one society, sometimes over more than one continent, okay? But we have to start thinking with what mode of production we are dealing with. Though all members of a group share the same interest, the connection with the group personality is neither immediate nor direct. I'm quoting here, by the way, from Ullman. You have a list of my readings at the end of the handout. This is Ullman, page 120 to 123. Only in capitalism is it possible for a group to qualify as class on all the criteria listed above. Only in capitalism. Okay? It is in this sense that Marx refers to class as, I'm quoting, product of the bourgeoisie, unquote. For the absence of effective communication in earlier periods hinders the exchange of information and context, which is essential for class formation. So, when Marx and Engels state that the history I'm quoting is the history of all hitherto existing societies, is the history of class struggle, in his brilliant book on Marx, Bertel Ullmann, I just mentioned him, opens his first chapter with the following paragraph. I'm quoting again from Ullmann. The most formidable, he says, difficulty facing all readers of Marx is his peculiar use of words. Vilfredo Pareto provides us with the classic statement of this problem when he asserts that Marx's words are like bats. One can see in them both birds and mice. Okay? A bat is both a bird and a mice. Thinkers through the years have noticed how hard it is to pin Marx down to particular meanings. Another prominent scholars deem it dangerous to mix up the aim of Marx's research and preoccupations with the tasks and language he uses. This might end up in a simplified or a simplistic understanding of Marx and of Bertel's citation. Now, another philosopher, the French contemporary French philosopher Etienne Balibar, a French Marxist, who has undertaken systematic attempts to study Marx's thought, notices, for example, first, that Marx usually uses the term masses for the proletariat, which lacks the consciousness. Yani proletariat, which lacks consciousness, we call them masses. Conscious of itself as a class. Secondly, that Marx never mentions the notion of proletariat throughout his voluminous work, thus Capital. I'm saying this so that we'll be aware. This is, I'm reiterating for the third time, this is a pamphlet of the beginnings. Okay? So please be aware of the vocabulary and be aware, keep in mind that Marx went on writing for something like 30 years after this. He's written hundreds and thousands of pages in political philosophy, okay, and economics. The study of capitalism is not the portrait of the bourgeoisie. It is not even the portrait of the capitalist. It is the analysis of the process of exploitation with all its conditions and manifestations. Okay? So, now, in order to understand the concept of historical materialism, this is the mode of production, is the prevailing mode of production, similar economic conditions and interests, as you can read there, and the consciousness of these interests, the cultural affinity and common political affinity when we talk about mode of production. In order to understand the concept of historical materialism, this is, I was talking about the base and the superstructure, the relation between the base, the mode of production, you see it here on my left, okay, and the superstructure, which contains culture, ideology, the juridical, the political, the economic relations of productions, with their relation to the economic into different spheres. This is a relation of always moving and changing, what we can call a mille plateau, or hundreds of bases that are moving. It's not a direct relation as some people would want to describe it. Political economy, I mentioned Adam Smith, Robert Malthus, David Ricardo, you might want to discuss them in class. Now, Marx's critique of the classical political economy, what does he seek? I'm saying all the time, Marx is in political philosophy and political economics. This is what he's doing, actually, okay? So, in his political economy, Marx relies mainly on the theories of Adam Smith Thomas Robert Malthus, and on his greater precursor, David Ricardo. Marx's critique of classical political economy seeks out first the internal conflicts which were sometimes felt by the economists but never clearly resolved. Secondly, it reveals the economist's political inclination to capitalism. And thirdly, it shows that his accommodation to capitalism is rooted not in bad faith, but in the bourgeois horizon of her intellectual production. How does capitalism affect the economic understanding? Okay, so all we think of the mode of production and its relation. It's not things and ideas coming from up the enforced on a society. Okay, so for Marx, capitalism is an unstable system which only can solve the problem it generates by creating even greater obstacles to its future progress. I'm skipping points 9, 10.1, and 10.2 in order to reach somewhere talking about capitalism and alienation. Capitalism does not only create crisis and wars, by the way. Yani the way out of any crisis, economic crisis, in capitalism would usually end up in a war. Capitalism does not only create crises and obstacles, it moreover leads to alienation. Alienation in Arabic, if you want, اغتراب وتغرب. Okay, مش اغتراب بمعنى سفر, moving from place to another place. Okay, it's let me try to explain it in English. I will directly now tackle point 10.3. Alienation. The term alienation has gained throughout its own history different meanings by the contribution of various philosophers and schools of thought. Often the view is held that society, through the division of labor, private property, and bureaucratization, reduces man to a thing. Yeah, the society that we live in, the modern capitalist society, or the societies at the fringe of capitalism, due to the division of labor, private property, bureaucracy, كمان I'm not entering into details, okay? لأنه the bureaucratic machine in a certain society is different from the bureaucratic machine in another society, especially the high industrialized capitalist society. But let's keep these three things in mind. Division of labor, private property, and bureaucratization. These three things reduce us as human beings to things. Yani our very understanding of ourselves we can only understand it through the relation to this huge, what we call a war machine. Okay? Let me try to explain better. With Marx, the term becomes loaded with new meanings. Alienation refers to the relation between man and the product of his productive activity. Embracing, in the broad meaning of this word, not only material but also intellectual products, as well as social institutions. It is above all the name of that objective relation in which man's products, including religion, the state, commodities, and other products, alienate themselves in relation to man. It's not anymore a simple natural relation, as if our forefathers who were living directly in nature. Now there is a whole machine of production, of product relations, of bureaucratization, and of actually producing surplus value that interferes between my relation as a human being, myself, okay, and the whole social structure and understanding of myself, my own consciousness. When we talk about human freedom, individual freedom, what have you, please take it easy, huh? Take it easy and try to understand it within this very complex relational structure. With the immense growth in the productive forces created by capitalism, there is a danger that the forces guiding human development would be taken over entirely by machines, as is happening today. And you are noticing, we are all noticing, and we have less, by the way, position. Now, you finish the university, you're not going to find a position. Neither here nor in the Gulf, by the way. طمنوا يعني, huh? There is a huge crisis. This is the crisis of globalization in its late phase. Definitely not the last phase, yani. No one is saying apocalypse, not at all. Especially if we're trying to analyze where could capitalism, this very liberal, aggressive capitalism, liberalism, and globalization could lead all of us, okay, as a mode of production, which is becoming perhaps prevalent in more than one continent. So with the immense growth in productive forces created by capitalism, there is the danger that the forces guiding human development would be taken over entirely by machines on the exclusion of human beings. This is one of the end effects of alienation, by the way. Science, Marx says in the Grundrisse, and I'm quoting, science thus appears in the machine as something alien and exterior to the worker, and living labor is subsumed under objectified labor, which acts independently of me as a human being. The worker appears to be superfluous insofar as his action is not determined by the needs of capital. End of quotation. Das ist in die Grundrisse, page 492. Alienation is always tantamount to self-alienation. Since alienated labor alienates, one, nature from man. Second, man from himself and from his own active function, his vital activity. And third, it also alienates the species from man. It turns his species' life into a means towards his individual life. This is Karl Marx in his essay Alienated Labor in the Selected Writings, edited by Maclellan, the same one who edited this book, Oxford and New York. This is page 81. So I reached point 11 and we stop here. I still have some minutes. I would like at the end to tackle en passant the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat, which appears in the Communist Manifesto, okay? Misinterpreted, misunderstood. It was firstly perhaps used by Lenin, the great theorist and revolutionary, definitely, misused, I don't know, in order to build this, the modern socialist state represented by the Soviet Union and some 3-4 decades ago. This dictatorship of the proletariat alludes to a transitional, I'm underlining, transitional revolutionary stage which leads to the abolition of all classes and to a classless society. هذا بالليكي عنوان كبير. Marx had borrowed this idea from Babeuf, who did not define it clearly. According to Marx, after seizing the power due to an organized revolution, organized يعني revolution of the proletariat with its consciousness, it would be childish to depend on an assembly elected by a general suffrage, يعني انتخابات عامة. It is necessary to maintain the dictatorship of the revolutionary minority which were carried to power by the revolution. All the time that is necessary to put in place new institutions. And all the time necessary to remold the society. All the time necessary, 1 week, 2 weeks, or 2 decades, or 200 years, I don't know, okay? So it's a very theoretical and preliminary idea found in the Communist Manifesto, again, in a pamphlet of the beginnings, okay? So one has to think about it, really. We don't take the Soviet example or other countries, okay, for that matter, or other revolutions for that matter, with this ideal of the dictatorship of the proletariat as something given by Marx. Not at all, not at all. So, I'm finishing. Marx was thinking here of the Parisian revolt of 1871 that lasted 2 months. The cursory mention of the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat mentioned by Marx was taken over by some later revolutionists to be elaborated into a real, horrifying, totalitarian regime based on the dictatorship of the vanguard party, as they come to call it, as was the case in the previous Soviet Union. So this is only one way to interpret it, okay? I'm finishing, last sentence. I'm positive that new Marxist theories are still capable to scientifically describe the ugly, inhuman conditions we live in today under the brutal control of a globalized capitalism. Please enjoy reading the Communist Manifesto. Thank you.